Hi, this is Bill Wendry, and today we're going to try something a little new and different. We're going to learn how to design a coil, build a coil, and install/test the coil. But before we begin, and believe me, we're going to begin very quickly here, I want you to understand that anything that you learn from these techniques that I use, they are your responsibility. They cannot be mine. I cannot be responsible for any mistakes you make or any accidents that you may have. So please, when you build your coil, be very careful. Take the information I give you and please check it against other video tutorials on YouTube or elsewhere, books or on the web. Please be careful and be safe. I can't ensure your safety for this. I cannot be responsible. But let's begin. Okay, so this is Google on my iPad, and you can see I've typed in steam-engine coil, and I get this right here, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to get rid of this ad over here. And there it is. So you can see what's going on this page. We've got 3 columns. We need to punch in information in these first 2 columns. The results come through in this 3rd column. So now beforehand, we need to decide what it is we're going to use for a wire and the tool around which we're going to wrap that wire. So let's do that right here. We're going to choose Canthal round wire. Now, there are many choices you can use here, but we're going to pick the top choice, Canthal A1. As far as the shape of the wire, it's going to be the round wire. So it's a standard reel of wire. And notice also that we're working in metric units as well. So the gauge wire that I have on hand is a 22 AWG, which stands for American Wire Gauge. So let me just punch that in on my little keyboard here. 22. The setup we're going to make a single coil for this one. We could choose a lot of different things here, as you can see. As much as an octa coil, which is 8 coils. Don't know who would ever use that, but we're going to use a single coil in our build. Okay, so the target resistance. Let's shoot for a nice sub-ohm tank. So let's try a 0.25. Let's see what that shows us. We'll go with a 0.25 coil. So that's a sub-ohm tank. All right, let's go to the side. So we're done with the first column. How about that? That was a piece of cake, wasn't it? Look at, we chose our wire, the shape of the wire, the gauge of the wire, the kind of coil we want, and the resistance that we want. So that's easy to do. The second column is, what is the inner diameter of that coil? Now, common inner diameter would be 3 millimeters, and the way you determine the inner diameter is to measure the tool you're going to wrap your coil around. You can use a drill bit that has a known diameter. You can use one of those little screwdrivers, and you can measure it with a set of micrometers or calipers. You can use some sort of object that has a known diameter. Well, a very common one, as I said, is 3 millimeters. So we're going to choose that as our diameter of choice for our coil. We're going to use a 3 millimeter coil or tool to make our coil with. So there we go. So we're getting there. A leg length, I'll show you what that is when we build the coil, but a common number to use would be 5 millimeters, so just punch that in there for now. And we're done punching everything in. We've punched in our wire gauge, the kind of coil we want to make, the resistance we want our coil to be, the diameter of the tool around which we're going to wrap our wire, and the leg length. So look at this. It's saying that we need to make a 4-wrap coil. It says number of wraps, 3.79. I'll explain this full and half wrap thing once we make our coil. But it's a 3 and 4. I want to change that. I want to make this resistance different, and you can do that. This is where we can jockey around with the program. We're going to say, let's try to make a 0.5 coil. Let's see what that returns us. Okay, so that's a little more reasonable, I think. So the only thing I changed here was the target resistance of our coil. Instead of making it a 0.23 coil, we're going to make a 0.5 coil, half an ohm. Sub-ohm, but a little bit higher ohm rating than the one we originally intended, but that's okay. Nothing else has changed in these two columns other than that, but look at the difference over here. Now we need an 8-wrap coil. I like that better. I like an 8-wrap coil more than I like a 4-wrap. Why? I don't know. I think the coils are a little more sturdy looking. It gives you a little more contact area with the cotton than just a 4-wrap coil. And if we do 8 wraps, full wraps, we're going to get a 0.5 coil. If we do half wraps, again, I will explain that in a moment. Or I shouldn't say a moment when we wrap the coil. 0.53. So we're pretty close to what we want. This right here, this number, heat capacity, that tells you how quickly or slowly your coil is going to heat up. And the bigger this number is, the slower. And our coil seems to be a little on the slow side, but that's okay. Leg power loss is only 4.5%. That's not bad at all. Anything 10% or less is a go. Down here is something else that we can look at, and that's how warm is our vape going to be. Just look at this right here, this green flame. If the flame is green, that means we've got a cool vape. So that's 200, I think. These are milliwatts per millimeter squared. I'm not sure, but what's important here is the color of your flame and this number. You don't want this number to go much over 300, or you're really pushing it. And to get a cool vape, it's saying set your mod at 45 watts. If you're a voltage vapor, set it at 4.8 volts. But most people vape in power mode, so you set your wattage here. If you'd like a warmer vape, just increase this number a little bit so we can drag our mouse over that, I hope. Let's see. There we go. Let's make this number 250. Which should give us, watch the color of the flame change here now. You ready? There it is. It changed to a orange color, which means we've got a warmer vape. And look at that. Now it's telling us if you want a warmer vape, set your mod to 57 watts. You know, that 57 to 60 range, that's right where I like to vape. So this is a good build for me. A 22 gauge Canthal coil at a half an ohm, 8 wraps, vaping at 57. You want a hotter vape, by the way? Change this number to something else. Let's change it to 300 and see what we get. So if you want to vape at 68 watts, you'll get a hot vape, and your milliwatts per millimeter squared, or maybe that's microwatts. I'm not sure. We'll have to look that up. Hey, maybe we can look it up down here. That's that number is the heat flux, right? So here, heat flux. Generally, you want something between 120 and 350. Some like cooler, some like it hot. The color of the flame icon gives you a rough idea. Well, it doesn't really tell us much about these units, but that doesn't really matter, does it? We just want to make sure. While we're down here, take a look at this. You've got some tutorials, and I encourage you to watch these tutorials because, as you know, as I've said, I cannot be responsible for any accidents that occur as a result of taking my advice or watching these videos, but you'll be safer if you check other sources. So please do that. Be careful with this stuff. This will at least give you a feeling of warm and fuzzy, because now you're not just guessing when you build your coil. Now you're getting more of an educated estimate. Actually, it's more than that. It's a calculated plan for building your coil. So we're going to get some 22 gauge wire. We're going to get our 3 millimeter tool. We're going to wrap our wire around the tool 8 times. And we're going to see if we really get a 0.5 resistance coil. And if we do, then we're going to put some cotton in it, juice it up, and vape. So, all right, that's that. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to build our coil based on our little experience using steamengine.org. So, first, before we begin, what I'd like to say is I'd like to tell you the difference between a half wrap and a full wrap. If you look at the end of this coil, you're looking at a half wrap. And the reason it's a half wrap is it doesn't continue all the way around. It only goes halfway around. Whenever the legs of the coil are both pointing in the same direction, you've got a half wrap on each end, okay? The ones in between those two outside half wraps are full wraps. So we want to make a coil that is an 8-wrap coil out of this Canthal 22 gauge wire. Since we want to make 8 wraps, and we also want, in this case, because of our atomizer, we want the legs to both be facing in the same direction, we're going to do a half wrap on each outside edge of the coil and 7 wraps in the middle, because 7 wraps plus a half makes 8 wraps, which is what we want. So here's how we do it. We've got our 3 millimeter diameter screwdriver around which I'm going to wrap the coil. I've got the wire. I've got the wire cutters, which I already used to cut the wire off the reel. And here we go with the wrapping. So I'm going to lay the wire right on top of the screwdriver like that and pinch it with my thumb so that it doesn't go anywhere. Now I'm going to make my outside wrap, which is right there. You see, that's a half wrap right there, isn't it? Just went halfway around the tool. So there's a half wrap. Now we're going to make 7 inside. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and now a half wrap. So we should have, let me take this off the tool so you can see it more clearly. We should have in between the 2 outside wraps, half wraps, 7 coils. I see 1, 2, 3, then 2 close together is 5, and then 6, 7. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wraps in between the 2 outside half wraps. Now, here's where the needle nose pliers come in. I'm going to hold on to the coil right. It looks pretty sloppy, by the way, doesn't it? That's okay. I'm going to tug on the end of this coil like that to make it nice and tight. I'm going to turn it around, and now I'll hold this end and tug on this end of the coil. And this is just to tighten the coil up. Now, it still looks pretty sloppy, but watch this. When I shove the coil together like that, look at how nice that coil looks now. Huh? Maybe I'll give it another tug to tighten everything up a little bit. Tug-a-roo and tug-a-roo. Okay, so there's our coil. And we are now, let me trim it up to make it look pretty. Cut off the ends here. Cut it nice and even. Now we're ready to install this 8-wrap coil into our atomizer. That's all there is to it. So let's do that next. You ready? Let's go. In an RTA, which is a rebuildable tank atomizer. And this is an example of one right here. So I'm going to unscrew the top of the tank to expose the build deck. The build deck is where we put our coil, okay? So I want to point out a few things about this build deck before we go on. First of all, there are screws, one on either side here, one here, and one right here. And those 2 screws enter these 2 holes, which are inside the tank. And that's where the coil legs go, right into these 2 holes. And the coil sits across. See how this is sort of got a concave section in it? And the air holes, you can see clearly inside that concave section. The coil sits here, and the air circulates around the coil via these holes. So one other thing is these slots that the screws sit in. Notice that there's a slot on this side, and there's a slot on the opposite side. Right where the coil sits, there's a slot on the end. The cotton has to sit in that slot, because at the bottom of that slot is where the e-liquid meets the cotton. Okay? So with that in mind, let's begin. We're going to take our coil, which is right here, and I've trimmed it using this little gizmo here, which just is a little sort of step tool. I put my coil there and clip it on the other side with my wire cutters to get the legs to a nice even length. The legs. And I'm going to sit the coil right in those holes, just like that. All right. Now I'm going to take my screwdriver and tighten those two screws on the side. I'm going to lightly touch the coil so that it doesn't wiggle around as I'm tightening, and I'm going to get good and tight. Same thing on this side. Good and tight. Okay, so that looks pretty good, except the coil's a little bit askew. So I'm going to make a little adjustment here. Get the coil nice and straight, running right across. Now notice what that looks like. Notice that the coil isn't touching anywhere but in those holes in which the legs are sitting. The coil is sort of floating free except for the very bottom of the leg sticking in the hole, making contact with this screw right here. So now we're going to run some cotton through this, but first let's have a look at the coil itself. If I turn it on, you can see, I hope you can see, that the resistance is 0.49, so that's pretty darn good, right? That's exactly what we want. And now I'm going to fire up this coil by pulsing it to make sure it glows nice and evenly. If it doesn't, looks a little cold on this side of the coil, so I'm going to what they call strum the coil. Let's see if it heats a little more evenly now. Beautiful. That's perfect, okay? So while that cools, I'm going to prepare my cotton. So here's a piece of cotton. We don't need a piece that thick, so I'm going to tear it in about half. Maybe a little less. And I'm going to make one end pointy. Just like that. Now, pull the cotton right through the coil, just like that. And that's perfect. That's not too loose, not too tight. Now, how long to cut the cotton? Well, it's got to sit at the bottom of this little groove we spoke of earlier. It's got to sit right in here. So I can cut this pretty short. I can cut it right about where my toothpick is, can't I? So let's do that. Get the scissors. I'm going to snip it right about there. Same thing on this side. Right about there. Now I can trim up the cotton a little bit to make it fit more easily in that little groove. So I'm going to give it a little haircut here. Like that. And let's just have a look and see what that looks like sitting in that groove. Well, that's a little much. Maybe I can shorten that up a little bit. That ought to do it. Yeah. So, you notice that it really doesn't want to sit in there. So what we need to do is get some juice. Juice on this coil. So let's do that. So now you can see what I'm doing. I'm sort of getting the cotton to lay right down inside that little groove right there. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Now that it's got some juice on it, I think this needs a little bit more. Now that the cotton's been moistened with the juice, it'll sort of go where I want it to go. So there. Now comes the tank. We're going to screw the tank on, being careful not to disturb our cotton. And there we go. Let me take this cap off. It'll be easier to deal with. So we get the tank on there, screwed on there nice and tight. The top. And we fill it up with juice. You like the juice? The juice is good. So we fill her right up, just like that. We're using Velvet Vapors, my favorite. It's all PG. All VG. I'm allergic to PG, so I'm one of the unfortunate ones. So there we go. We're all juiced up. The wick has been wet. Let's take a little pufferoo and see how she works. Oh, that's a nice. So there we are with our own coil, ready to rock and roll with our RTA. Good luck. Hope you enjoyed the video.